Hello, this is Ryan, and welcome to another audio exercise walkthrough. Today we're going to be taking some time to look at an EQ exercise that will demonstrate the different types of EQs and how to set them up and how to adjust them. So a really nice little overview of those things to make sure that you understand how to do them in your DAW. Here's the assignment that I'll be walking through. If you want to take a screenshot of that so you can follow along, highly recommend it. But the basics of what we're trying to do here is insert plugins in a DAW, which is Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton, FL Studio, Samplitude, Sequoia, whatever you use. Probably not Sequoia, but to use your program for audio and then modify audio tracks on that with EQ plugins. We'll be bringing in examples, importing audio. We'll then be duplicating tracks and those examples, which is a very useful skill. And then we'll be modifying each of those tracks and then exporting each of those tracks individually with the modifications. So there actually are several steps in doing this exercise correctly. The first thing we're going to do is set up our session. So let me share the correct screen here for that, and we'll get it going. Boom. So here in front of us, we see the Pro Tools startup screen, and I'm going to work pretty quickly here because it's a video, and you'll be able to walk through it. Always label your projects well. I think this gets overlooked. Never call something song 1, song 2. Then like you're on song 300 and you're like, is this 300 or 301? It's useless. Use all that space you got, right? And you don't need to do periods necessarily. Most computer programs will now allow you to do spaces. This specific assignment calls for 44.1 kilohertz sample rate and a 16-bit bit depth. I'm going to use 24-bit because the sample I'm importing is 24. It doesn't have to convert it. But the assignment actually calls for 16, just so you know. All right, here we go. So then it creates a new session. The session will be completely blank. We have our mix window, and behind that we'll have our edit window, or vice versa. First thing I'm going to do is Shift-Command-I in Pro Tools, which will bring up the import dialog here. And I'm working on an album here with the artist Nae, N-A-E, and I'll be mixing this track in a little bit because we made some notes on it yesterday. So I'm going to bring in this pre-mastered version. Once again, always label stuff clearly. You can see how nicely labeled that is. Pre-mastered version of this song, which will be fine. The next thing is, where do you want it to copy that file? And I'm going to copy that file into the audio files folder of this Pro Tools session folder. Session folder contains all of the assets for your project. This is true of most DAWs. Most now have pretty good file hierarchies. It processes, brings in the audio, and I'm going to then edit the audio slightly, add it to a new track, and edit it so that it's a little shorter, so that my exports and stuff all go faster. I think there's a couple ways to do this, but one way is to look at your time and sort of figure out where about 30 seconds is, and then find a good place to stop. And I also am going to make sure that this audio plays back.
Shop right, smart set, grocery outlet, hair for kids, Chuck E. Cheese, K&G's, fashion sleeves, beauty supply, and a double deck in Cali like a queen, rent king, tantrum, Maui.
So we'll cut it right there, boom. And I'm just going to, for this project, get rid of all of that and put in a little fade here. And that will allow us to have a nice, I don't know why it's not letting me do my fade. What am I doing? I'll just do it like that. So it'll just fade out. Cool. Next thing I'm going to do, as the assignment says, is make copies, duplications of this track. You can do that right-click. Your DAW might do it differently, but if you duplicate, you can duplicate different parameters. In this case, yeah, I want everything that's here. So duplicate. And then we need to, of course, name all of these. right? So that's coming up next. I'm going to resize stuff so it's easier to see what's going on here. And there we have all 6 versions of this that I think we'll need. I'm going to label this first one strip original. And then as we move along, we'll label those, the rest of these appropriately by the EQ type. So now the thing that is different here is if I hit play right now, all of these will play back together. That's not what we want. It will probably distort, but we can't tell. So, I mean, you might be able to tell auditorily, but we want to make sure on our meters. So check this out.
Drive right in.
You might be able to tell that's way louder. And in fact, it is clearly distorting up here in this very small meter. But none of the individual tracks show distortion. If you look at their levels, there's no distortion.
Drive right in. Don't see.
So what we need here is a master fader. Always have a master fader in your session, a place where you can monitor the primary output. Shift Command N in Pro Tools. Command over to the right gives you stereo, and Command down twice gives you master fader. Now I have a master, and I'll be able to see that, oh my goodness, this is overloaded. Now, there's a couple things you can do here. You could take each one of these and space them out so that as you work, you're never playing more than one at a time. Right? Because only one's at that point in the timeline. Or you can utilize your solo buttons, and you just have to be careful that you don't overload as you work. It's not going to ruin anything as long as the level to your speakers and or headphones is down. It's not going to like break the system or something, but it's something to be very cautious of. And if you sense something that was distorted and overload to a discerning client, they would be probably a little annoyed with you. All right, so let's get going. First one, we're going to leave as is. I'm just going to mute it because we're done. Nothing needs to change there. The second one, if we look at the assignment, says a peaking EQ with a, this is modified from the original assignment that was up. I've made it more drastic. But a peaking EQ at 100 hertz, 10 dB. And it says a Q factor of 2. So what I'm going to do is look at my mix window here. And on this second one, in an insert, I'm going to find an EQ. And in this case, a one-band EQ will work. I will also show a more typical parametric in a bit. But we can use the simple common one-band EQ to do this assignment. Now we need to find a peaking EQ, and I'm going to walk through this once here. The rest of them will go faster. This one-band EQ in Pro Tools here, I find very useful to put at the top of almost every track, and then I use high-pass filters. Now I don't use them up this high because this is what that would sound like. You can barely even hear it because it's just the highest part. I'm actually going to throw a little sort of mastering plugin on here. As I mentioned, this track is completely pre-mastering, so there's no volume push on the master. But for our purposes, so just ignore that. It's just so it's clear. Right. So we have our one-band EQ. We have a high-pass filter, a notch filter. Bring this up so you can see what a notch filter looks like. This is sometimes also called a band reject filter. You have two here that look similar. These are shelving filters. See how it's like a shelf lifting up the whole low end or bringing down the whole low end? And the other one lifts up the whole high end or brings down the whole high end, and you can obviously change that frequency. So that's a shelving EQ. You also have a peaking EQ, which is what we look for this particular one. And then finally, you have the low-pass filter, which cuts off the high end. So and you hear this in a lot of breaks. Sounds like you're underwater or something. So that's what's going on there. So the one we need for this assignment is a peaking filter at 100 hertz. We can just type it in, boom. And then we want the gain for this of -10, I believe, yep, which we could also just type in. And then we want a Q of 2, Q factor of 2. Q is the width. It stands for quality, but it's the width of the area of frequencies that are affected surrounding the center frequency, usually. So a higher Q is a narrower band. A lower Q is a wider band of frequencies that are affected. So I'm asking for a Q of 2. And what's great about most DAWs and most plugins is you can just bypass them to hear the difference. So check this out. Here's without. And if you listen to the bass, you can hear it get significantly different.
Drive right in, don't sit down on the edge, center town.
Like there's no
Space for
bass.
lease, food for
And there's the
less. Bless this mess.
So that's number 1. All right, cool. We got that down. Let's move on to the second one. The second one here says a shelving EQ. So we're going to add to our second track a EQ. We can use our one band again. It's fine. Yeah, I think so. And our shelving EQ is going to have an 8 dB with the corner, which means the frequency that you adjust, at 5,000 hertz, 5 kilohertz. An 8 dB push, meaning brought up. So easy. Boop. I'm going to solo that track. Make sure we solo so we don't overload too much. Still overloading, but a little bit. And then I'm going to have my shelving EQ. I said an 8 dB increase. That's pretty significant. You don't need to worry about the Q, but we need to set that frequency to 5,000. So check this out. Here it's just boosting everything. Or you can just type in something.
Drive right in, don't sit down.
So if you listen to the vocals, they'll get more like spitty.
Town, space for lease, food for less. Bless this mess. Let's undress.
Now, when you do a large boost like this, you are, in effect, bringing up the level of a certain area of the frequency spectrum. So you may need to go back to your channel and bring the fader down slightly to adjust, once again, so that you're not clipping or peaking or distorting on your master fader. So if I just bring that down a little bit, we shouldn't see any issues. Cool. On to the next one. That's it. Make sure you can hear it, bypass it, turn it back on. Okay, so for the next one, we have a band pass filter, which is essentially a combination of a high and low pass filter. So for this, I'm going to use a parametric EQ. Comes with Pro Tools, been around forever. And if we look to the left of the main visual graph, you will see a high pass filter here and a low pass filter here. We can turn those on, and adjust. Sorry, my computer just decided to change the assignment, so I can't see the directions. Awesome. There we go. All right. And adjust appropriately. So we're going to do that. Won't take too long. we got to bring this one up to 300 hertz. Not 3,000. Boop. And we're going to bring this one down to 5 kilohertz. And what you're going to hear is this starts to, remember to turn it on. You should see it. And if you want to make them a little steeper, makes it more obvious. This is how many decibels you cut off per octave in attenuation. So check this out. Solo it. Pretty different sound. And you can see our gain of our input here on the top compared to our gain on the output has about a 3 decibel difference. And we're kind of clipping on the input too.
Drive right in, don't sit down. On the edge, center town. Space for lease, food for less. Bless this mess, let's undress. Park and shop, in and out. Shop and save a lot. Shop right, Smart Set, grocery outlet. Hair for kids, Chuck E. Cheese, K&G's, fashion sleeves, beauty supply, and a double-deck Cali like a
This
queen,
is super exciting right here. After we put all of these to 5.2. All right, so back to our window here. Now check this out. If I bypass, this is the original. And that's the new one.
Drive right in,
Often, this is
don't
a good
sit
starting
down.
place for
On
a
the edge,
radio
center
effect.
town.
And what you
Space
might
for
do
lease,
is boost the output
food for
slightly,
less.
knowing that
Bless
you're
this mess,
cutting off a lot of
let's
those low
undress.
frequencies.
Park and shop, in
And
and
some of the
out.
highs.
Shop and save a lot.
that they're
Shop
comparable.
right, Smart Set, grocery outlet. Hair for kids, Chuck E. Cheese, K&G's, fashion sleeves, beauty supply, and a double-deck Cali like a
So that's the fourth one. The third one, I'm sorry. The fourth one is a band stop or notch filter. And the easiest way to do this, once again, is with the single band EQ. But you could do the equivalent to what you're about to see with the full parametric. Sort of. You just have to adjust your Q and stuff to make it work. So I click here, which says notch filter. And I set the primary frequency to 1,400 hertz. And I'm done. Oh, well, let me just make sure. The Q is 0.5. So I'm actually asking for a very wide Q. This is more what I would use for an example to make sure it's obvious that I can hear it. So check this out. I don't know if you can hear exactly what's happening. It sort of still has high-end snare, but that synth just disappears. That part. Sounds like the synth by itself is underwater, but we still have the high end of the snare.
drive right in, don't sit down. On the edge, center town.
Cool. Those are your primary ways to do it. I'm going to get rid of this last track here. I'm, of course, going to go back in and remember to label everything. So the third one is strip band pass, and command right gets you to the next. The name of the song is Strip. It's about strip malls. Is a notch at 1.4 kilohertz. And now they are all labeled correctly. Great. So now we need to bounce out our selections. So I'll show this once, and then I think you can complete it beyond that. The important thing to realize about bouncing, in some programs now it's called exporting, though they are technically different processes, is whatever you hear is what is going to be bounced. So if you have everything muted, that's what will be bounced. If you play like this with one unmuted, that's what will be bounced. If you solo one or two, those both will be bounced, right? So whatever you hear is what's bounced, which means you just have to pay very close attention to those solos as you work. In addition to that, it will bounce the amount of time you've selected And if you haven't selected time, most programs will just bounce to the end of the session. So you could potentially end up with a 5-minute bounce where there's 4.5 minutes of silence. That is a much bigger wave file or AIFF file or MP3 file on your computer. So make sure you've selected, as I have here, some sort of time to bounce. So I could do that and select in the timeline. This does not mean it's going to bounce all of these tracks. It's still going to bounce only what I hear, which in this case is just going to be the second one with the peaking curve because it's soloed and unmuted, whereas this one's soloed, but it's muted. Right? So let's do it and let's Let's name it. Bounce to disk. Disk refers to the hard drive disk. We hit that. We go main out. We're going to do a wave, and we're going to add the MP3 version. This gives us one that's very easy to send to a client or what have you. Thank you, Pro Tools, finally. And we want to make sure we are bouncing as an interleaved audio file in stereo. We can switch to 16-bit as the assignment asks for. If we did that, we would probably want to do a dithering plugin on the master of our session. But for now, we'll just direct smash it. But this interleaved is worth mentioning. Interleaved audio are stereo files that appear as one audio file, right? When someone sends you their new track or sound effect and you open it, it doesn't look like there's a left file and a right file, right? That is what is there. But they've taken those left and right files and combined them so it looks to you like just one file. That's called an interleaved stereo file because the two are connected. A multiple mono would give us the left and right files independently. And mono summed would just combine the two and just smash them right into the middle. Obviously, with this, it's a stereo track with things ping-ponging around and stuff. So we would want to make sure that that's an interleaved stereo file. And then we will name it correctly. All of that. Wow. And then at the end, we can do something like this. 0, 1. In this case, it's our peaking example. Or peaking EQ example. Once again, it doesn't cost extra to have a good long name of something, right? I don't understand the reason that people do things like assignment 6. It's like, no, what class? What's your name? What's this? Or whatever it is. All right, and then we hit bounce, and we can go offline or we can hear it in time. So here we go. Boop. Except for that little issue. Funny. We'll talk about that in a second. So if I have to make this shorter, I can do that. Take out this stuff. Hopefully. Here is the MP3 metadata. So you can actually label this and add artist information. This is the information where if you're looking at Spotify or your phone or what have you, and you see like who is the artist or where was it recorded, that type of information can actually be embedded with what's called ID3 tags. And you can put those in the file when you export it. This is really useful, I find, when you're working with clients and you're sending like versions of songs or someone wants to hear a track. Well, you can make sure that that track has all the metadata, including genre and stuff, so it pops up into their library or phone or iTunes or whatever they're using appropriately. And then it bounces. And if we jump back over to our folder, we will find that bounced file. 21 assignment EQ exercise. We will find that bounced file in the session folder, which I just clicked on there. And then here's our session file. Here's our bounced files folder. So you'll see this is my peaking EQ example. And if we look at the audio files folder, in the session folder here, you'll see that original full length. Even though I cut it shorter in the session, the original file is still longer. It's still the full file. And that's where you will find that file for upload. Then, for each of those, you do the same thing. So you go back through, mute that one, unmute this one, and bounce it out. And this one will be called Shelving Curve 5K. And you do the same thing, mute that one, unmute this one. This one will be called Band Pass.
Drive right in.
Etc. Then all of those files here, did I close the window? No. All of those files you select. In a Mac, you go to compress. On a PC, I believe it's like move to and then compress to a folder, and it will make a zip file for you. So that is and then you take those and you upload it to appropriately. So that is a basic walkthrough of the EQ exercise, how to insert plugins, import audio, basics of watching your master fader, and then also adjusting those EQ plugins so that you can hear the effect and turn them on and off. Exporting, and then making sure that you create a zip file and upload those to the appropriate spot. Hopefully that's helpful, and I will see you soon.